This is a very creepy story. Here's a man who maybe got away with the murder.
Tonight on Mugshots, Ira Einhorn, the mystery behind the man they call the unicorn.
The guy had a charisma. He had a force.
He's a murderer, woman abuser, and he's a coward.
When we found that he had skipped the country, I don't think anybody was really surprised about it.
In March of 1979, a young woman, Holly Maddox, had been missing for a year and a half, and the police suspected her boyfriend was involved. Looking for evidence, they went to his house.
I rang the bell to 2C. We were greeted at the door by Ira Einhorn, who all he had on was a robe, had the robe open, and then I presented him with a copy of the search warrant. All of us then went inside his apartment. We then went out into the porch area, and there's a door that had a padlock on it. I asked Einhorn, did he have a key for that? And he said, no, he didn't have a key. I then told him that I was going to have to break it. We had a warrant, and he said, do what you got to do. I was able to take the hasp off of the locking portion without disturbing the locking mechanism itself. The first thing I saw was a closet full of boxes, and a suitcase had a tag on it, and it was Holly Maddox's name on the green suitcase. I'm now in the closet, and the only thing that is left in the closet after all the boxes and the suitcase has been removed is the steamer trunk. And now the odor that I had smelled initially is even more profound. And I went to open the trunk, and there was a lock on the trunk. So I turned to Einhorn once again, and I said, do you have a key for this lock? And he said, no, he didn't have a key. I then got a crowbar, and I was able to remove the mechanism. And when I opened the trunk, I noticed laying right on the top were newspapers, and then I noticed that the trunk was all layered with styrofoam. This is the styrofoam that was in there. I then proceeded to start moving everything to the left. And the first thing I noticed was a hand. And the hand was mummified. The hand looked as though somebody, or Holly, had tried to push the trunk open. I then immediately stopped searching and said to Einhorn, it looks like we found Holly. Einhorn said, you found what you found.
Just to throw you in a trunk for your grave, lie there and rot in your killer's apartment, that is really too much for most people to comprehend.
I went to teach that morning, got into my car, and I was driving on the Schuylkill Expressway with the radio on. It was about 12:30, I remember, and I hear this announcement. It says, Ira Einhorn arrested for murder. His girlfriend was in the trunk. And I just sort of shocked. I said, what? And I had to pull over because I couldn't. I said, what? You know, like the radio, say that again?
He was very cool, he was very calm, he was very collected. His demeanor was very, very stoic.
I remember I was sitting in my office and I get a phone call. It's Ira calling from jail. And I said, Ira, what do you know? He starts to talk about Einstein with me. He starts to talk about what we had talked about, a couple, the movie we had seen, as if nothing had happened.
What happened, according to prosecutors, was that Ira Einhorn murdered Holly Maddox by striking her multiple times in the head and then kept her body in a trunk in his apartment for 18 months.
We were becoming increasingly concerned because we knew that Holly would have been in touch within a year and a half. I was living in Dallas at the time, and Mom called me up one day, and all she said was, they found Holly. And that was... emotionally, that was the pet.
Well, we had a cat at the time that was very ill, and my mom standing there crying again, wringing her hands, saying they found Holly, and your dad's upset, and he's at the funeral home, and, you know, Dots, the cat, is worse, and I don't know what to do. And I said, Mom, and I've got to pick up Mary at school, and I said, Mom, I'll do it.
I got a phone call from Buffy, and she said they found Holly. And I said, is she alive? And she said, no. And I said, I'll be right back.
I take the cat to the vet. The vet says, I'm sorry, we have to put your cat to sleep. This was almost funny because it was so awful.
I can remember driving the 10 minutes home and just wishing that everyone else was off the highway. I even, for a brief time, you know, put on, it was such a futile gesture, but I put on my emergency blinkers and I thought, maybe I'll just run through all the lights. Well, there were like a total of 3, but to me that was a lot.
So here I am, working on paper towels by this time, because I can't stop crying. I'm driving a car. You know, the vet's probably thinking, oh my God, how, you know, I've never seen anybody do this over a cat.
So I walked in the house and Mom and Daddy were sitting at the table, and I just said, I'm really sorry. And Daddy said, well, your mother and I have grieved, and now it's your turn to start. And I thought, oh my, you know, because I knew it wasn't true. But what do you say to somebody when they've said, intimate, don't go there, this is too painful?
That's when it really hit me. And 2 guys carrying out the trunk. Yeah, that was her coffin.
It was big news. You know, Ira was a celebrity. When I say a celebrity, he was in that category of a known person where the press was covering him.
Ira Einhorn was Philadelphia's most visible hippie, a leader of the counterculture movement and its most outspoken pacifist.
Here was Mr. Peace, Mr. Love, the hippie guru of Philadelphia. And that's why there was shock and disbelief.
I was one of the people initially who said, you know, let's wait and see, let him defend himself. At the bail hearing, I said he would not run away. I didn't think he would because he told me he was innocent.
Don't forget, this is the period of conspiracy and paranoia, and everybody felt that that the CIA or something was doing all these clandestine activities. So the first response was, can't be, that they're trying to set Ira up.
On April 3rd, 1979, the day after Holly's funeral, Einhorn was brought to City Hall for a bail hearing. He was represented by former district attorney and current 4-term senator from Pennsylvania, Arlen Specter, who lined up a lawyer, a priest, a reverend, and a vice president from Bell Telephone to testify on Einhorn's behalf.
Everybody, including myself, would go up and testify to Ira being this gentle, sweet, loving, intelligent person. The judge was himself, so he said, I'd never heard such glowing reports about somebody. I mean, he literally said that.
To my shock, and even all these years later, 20-some years later, I still cannot believe that bail was set at $40,000.
He walked away after a wealthy friend posted the $4,000 bond. Einhorn announced he was looking forward to a trial to clear his name. It was at this point that Arlen Specter stepped aside.
I had a meeting with Ira in Arlen Specter's office, and the mantle was passed from Arlen Specter to me.
Meanwhile, in article after article, reporters searched for something that would explain the gruesome murder.
The media was crucifying Ira. Philadelphia Magazine ran a story with fake blood on all the pages of the articles. The Inquirer was certainly none too friendly, and the media was poisoning the atmosphere for trial.
Oh, no, that's a total lie. I mean, look, we have cases every day that are major cases all across America. People get a fair trial in this country.
He came to me He said, I'm going to stay, and I'm going to face the music, and I'm going to go in front of a jury of my peers. And I said to him, Ira, you're an overweight Jew with long hair, with a beard, wearing sandals, with dirty toes, who just allegedly killed a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant cheerleader. Ira, HJK1. And he said, what? I said, HJK1. He said, what does that mean? I said, when you're in prison, Ira, making license plates, and you see the request come in for license plate HJK1, that's my way of saying, hello, Ira from Harry J. Katz.
Then, in mid-January 1981, almost 2 years after Holly Maddox's body was found, and just as the trial was about to be scheduled, Ira Einhorn disappeared.
He was living up in the Mount Airy section of Philadelphia. We went up, and there was no answer. And we went inside the apartment, and he was gone.
Coming up, a closer look at Ira Einhorn, the man who took center stage in Philadelphia's counterculture revolution.
I think here was a guy, and I don't think it's been said enough, that he, you know, came out of an ordinary existence to really accomplish something and ruined it. The neighborhood, as far as we were concerned, started right about here. I was considered one of the tough kids. Ira was also considered a tough kid because he went away one summer when he was 12 to camp, and he did like 1,000 push-ups a day, and he grew into this monster. He grew about 4 inches, and he had this huge barrel muscular chest on these very, very spindly legs. But after that, no one ever picked on him again. I mean, he had a look about him that was, you know, just said, don't mess with me.
Einhorn grew up on this block in the West Oak Lane section of Philadelphia. In the 50s, it was a working-class, predominantly Jewish neighborhood.
We dated, we hung out at places like Howard Johnson's, we walked every place. It was like happy days.
His friends recall a tight-knit family.
Ira's mother was a typical Jewish mother. She loved Ira more than anything. Ira was her pearl. His father I really liked, but he was kind of a wishy-washy guy. His brother was kind of weird in that he always had problems. He was sickly, and Ira protected him.
In 1957, he graduated from one of the top high schools in the city and was moving on to the University of Pennsylvania.
From the safety of secret committees, they talk about the danger of war. A spin of a coin on a table could mean 10,000 men, maybe more.
I was never a hippie. No.
Harry J. Katz started an underground paper that Einhorn wrote for. He remembers him in college.
I was just a plain old English major, and that was essentially it. And Ira was like out there. He was a very experimental kind of guy, and I respected him for that. And he was a man before his time.
Einhorn pledged a fraternity his freshman year and immediately left it. He rarely attended classes, but studied well beyond the requirements. After graduating, he traveled around the country to places that would later become the symbols of the counterculture revolution, becoming firmly engrossed in the movement's ideology.
He became sort of an icon of the counterculture here because he represented everything that was going on at that time, from political activism to drugs and various other particular kinds of subjects that became the core of the counterculture rebellion.
Stuart Samuels was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania.
This is where the University of Pennsylvania really starts. This is Ira's office. You know, he loved to be seen in public, particularly talking to people who looked important. And the university was like, again, his home, his public home. This is the student union area where he would give his free university lectures, or he would meet people. You know, you could not miss Ira because Ira, the way he looked and the way he smelled.
He smelled. I mean, it's really as simple as that. Ira had terrible body odor.
The truth of the matter is that Ira spent about 2 to 3 hours every day bathing. He would spend hours in the bathtub, conduct business from the bathtub, had a phone. He was constantly, he was absolutely pristine clean, but he never cleaned his clothes. And he would put on this mantle of garments that were almost like going out in the world. He needed a scent that was other than his own. It was a persona. Ira did things to shock people. You know, that was the way he drew attention to himself. That once he got you and once he started talking to you, it was almost mesmerizing.
The Defense Department has a contract out on the world, and the FBI helps put through that contract. And I'm not against the agents themselves, because they're the victims, as a lot of other people in this society are, of a structural situation. The FBI agents themselves have wives and children, and I'm not against them personally.
Between 1962 and 1978, this guy developed something in Philadelphia. He was out there doing things for the city that were really positive in nature.
We're going to be selling full life-size portraits of the FBI agents who've been infiltrating our neighborhood. They've roughed off a couple people, which is not exactly the way I would want our government agencies to comport themselves.
Despite his anti-government protests, Einhorn was becoming the connection between the establishment and the counterculture. As Philadelphia's hippie guru, he worked with the university to quell rioting students and with the city to negotiate a peace with other social activists, including the radical group MOVE. He testified before Congress in support of space exploration, offering a poem as his written testimony. He even ran for mayor against Frank Rizzo, the notorious former chief of police.
He was really a very egomaniacal person. And as a result, it was very powerful and very seductive and very compelling. He was a performer on the stage of society. And as a result, you know, that became his attraction.
Previous reports credit Einhorn as one of the founders of the first Earth Day in 1970. Former Earth Day committee members have angrily refuted this claim and point out that he monopolized the stage by refusing to relinquish the microphone for half an hour.
That could very well be true because Ira could take over a show. I mean, you know, like he saw right through things. No, you got to do it this way. This is the way we're doing it. Suddenly, he would come in and he would people would be following him. He just had that kind of charisma.
And Einhorn literally lived off that charisma.
He didn't have a job. His job was Ira. And Ira, in that context, was to be in everything, to be aware, to be active. To talk to people, to convince them about how important he was and how intelligent he was. And as a result, people responded, and they thought he had value.
Einhorn's visibility as the city's most prominent counterculture leader led to an unusual alliance. He became a consultant for large corporations, acting as their liaison to the youth movement in Philadelphia.
On one hand, people said, oh my God, this guy, there's something about him, the smell is too much. But on the other hand, dignitaries would sit through it and be fascinated by him. I mean, you know, and do things for him. The president of AT&T would meet with this guy, and he agreed to send out correspondence for Ira, anything he wanted, to anybody.
And you have to understand this in the context of the 70s. The CEO said, hey, we've got to make ourselves aware of what's going on in this world. And Ira was the perfect conduit. Really, it was a very easy deal. We'll pay you your books, your mail, your telephone, your Xeroxing. Be our contact to that new avant-garde that was happening at the time, intellectually, culturally, and socially. And that's what he did. This is the street that Ira lived on, you know, all the time. I knew him. This was the house. And it's sort of nondescript now, but it's got a history. Now we're in the back of the house where Ira lived. He lived on the second floor. That little extension there, it wasn't very finished, but that's where the trunk was. There wasn't a place to hang out. It wasn't very comfortable. You know, there was no place to sit. Ira wanted that because he wanted his privacy. The only people he really brought home with him were women. Well, we're going to where Ira really hung out and was sort of the center of his meetings with the CEOs and his various seductions, a place called La Terrasse. And this was the place where Ira used to be king of the hill. What he used to do was basically sit in the center table
and have all the people surround him, and then everybody would come over to him and pay homage.
In October 1972, Holly Maddox walked into La Terrace. Her journey from a small town in Texas to Einhorn's world in Philadelphia would end in tragedy. Next on Mugshots.
Growing up in Tyler, Texas was, in a word, conservative.
Holly Maddox was the oldest of 5 children. Her father was an infantryman in World War II and an engineer for the Texas Highway Department. He raised his family with a caring but authoritarian hand.
All of us were brought up pretty strictly. We always knew what the standards were, what the curfews were. We knew the rules. But I think Holly had a way of charming them. And Daddy wouldn't quite melt, but he would voice some approval.
She taught me to swim, took us trick-or-treating. She would teach us girls the words to the Beatles songs, because, everybody was nuts for the Beatles.
This is through the eyes of a child. Those are the only eyes I got to see her with. She was perfect. Come Christmas time, we would all hop in the car, like Holly and Meg, Buffy and I, and we'd drive around and look at lights.
They just don't build houses with any personality and character like this anymore.
We had a long hall the way our house was set up, and there was John's room, and then there was Mom and Daddy's room, and then there was Holly's room. She'd go by his room when he was in there, and in her loving way go, and then take off and run down. One day he decided, okay, fine, I'll fix her, so he put a little baby buggy out in front of his doorway with bricks in it. And
all of her heavy toys and blocks.
And when she took off, she wiped out over it.
As a teenager, Holly's life held nothing but promise. She was strikingly beautiful, excelled at school and dance, voted most likely to succeed, and even made the cheerleading team. But Holly had some unexpected difficulty in high school.
Holly didn't have necessarily a wonderful time in high school dating. In the 50s, women were supposed to be beautiful or smart, but not both.
She wanted to spread her wings.
Holly left Tyler in 1965 to attend Bryn Mawr College, an all-girls school just outside Philadelphia. A short time after graduation, she made her way to the city and to the center of Einhorn's world, La Terrace.
He saw her, and here was this fat, bearded, belly, Jewish kid from Philadelphia, and here is this beautiful, blonde, ethereal person walked in, and Ira was just in love. And what Ira did was, when he wanted something, he just went over and did it.
Within 2 weeks, Holly and Einhorn were living together. Einhorn called himself the Unicorn, Einhorn meaning one horn in German. But the reference has a poignant message. The unicorn of fable has a dual personality, an exceptionally gentle character, but fiercely violent when cornered. In the fall of 1973, Holly brought Einhorn home to meet the family.
In the first place, you should never preface a visit by saying, I'm bringing someone home and I know you're not going to like him, Daddy.
What I didn't reckon for was an attitude. And this attitude was so punky.
He helped himself to seconds before we'd even all had a plate. And then when he was through with his second plate, he leaned his chair back on 2 legs, put his feet on the table. That's universally known as almost a hanging offense in Texas.
What disturbed the family most was his attitude towards Holly.
I had a pretty thorough glimpse of their relationship. From his point of view, it was a master and pet.
It wasn't the same Holly. She was very subdued and very subservient.
Everyone knew Holly and Einhorn had a stormy relationship. They split up several times and dated other people, but they were always drawn back together.
We spent so much time together. I never, ever saw Ira do anything that was violent.
Later, the police would recover Holly's diary from Einhorn's apartment. In the summer of 1977, Holly and Einhorn took a trip to Europe where she decided to leave him for good.
She said when they got back to Philadelphia, she was leaving Ira because she was tired of his bull.
Holly returned to the States alone and finished the summer in Fire Island, New York, where she met a man, cut her hair, and made plans to move into her own apartment in Philadelphia. At 30, Holly was reclaiming her independence. Ted Fink's wife was with her on Fire Island.
She had said to Ruth, like she knew it was going to be difficult, trying to get away from Ira, and the only way to do it was to cut it.
But Einhorn had other plans. After returning to the States, he tracked her down and insisted she come back and talk to him, or he would toss her personal effects on the street. From Fire Island, Holly called 4 people to try and retrieve her belongings for her. No one was available. Reluctantly, on Friday, September 9th, 1977, Holly returned to Philadelphia to try and calm Ira down.
Comes October, nothing. Comes November, there's Thanksgiving, nothing. After Christmas, Mom and Daddy were convinced something was wrong.
I had a telephone call from Mr. Maddox, who asked me, told me who he was, and told me their concern over their daughter and wanted to know if I could help them.
Robert Stevens was a retired FBI agent in Tyler at the time.
One of the things that bothered me was he had told the family on 2 occasions that she had merely walked out of the house that morning while he was in the shower and had never come back. Never heard from her again. And when the police detective in Philadelphia talked to him, he said that yes, she had called him about 2 days later and said that she would call him weekly. This wouldn't make sense unless he has something he's hiding.
You know, we all sort of looked back and said, you know, why didn't we think about Holly's disappearance, you know? Well, you know, here's somebody who'd been part of our circle and all of a sudden she disappeared. And in the context of that time, it was understandable. The explanation, Ira says, well, she went off and was living her own life and we're finished and I'm going on with mine. And we bought it.
We wanted to make Ira feel comfortable. Even though he knew we were making inquiries concerning who could she have possibly gone off with, rather than in what grave she might be in.
Stevens and his partner gathered enough information for the Philadelphia police to obtain a search warrant.
I remember in my house in Woodstock, this was after the bail and so forth, and that weekend happened, Jerry Rubin was up, Peter Coyote, myself, a bunch of friends, all around, and Ira was there. He came in the door. All of a sudden, we were talking about him, and all of a sudden he appeared, literally, just from nowhere. And we confronted him at that time. We all asked him, we pounded him with, Mitt, what's going on? Be a man. Be somebody who's sort of, this, it's a horrible thing. It's okay. Maybe you get off on manslaughter. Maybe, you can do, you can claim some other thing. He would laugh. He would just laugh. No show, no emotion, no fear, nothing.
When we come back, Ira Einhorn leads investigators on a manhunt through Europe.
In 1979, when Holly's body was found, we thought that would be, only a year or two would have to pass before he was brought to justice. And it appears we were slightly mistaken.
A lot of people were disappointed because they felt that he had left them down by leaving, by not proving his innocence. Once he split, everybody said he's guilty.
In January 1981, Ira Einhorn, experimenter, thinker, and celebrated advocate of nonviolence, was now a fugitive, running from the charge of bludgeoning his girlfriend. The extraditions officer for the Philadelphia district attorney got his first break only 4 months after Einhorn disappeared.
In April of 1981, we get word that he had been living with an Irish couple.
Ira came to my door on a wet and windy winter's evening, and he was looking for a place to stay. Apparently had knocked on the wrong door. I felt very sorry for him, and so I asked him if he would be interested in using our granny flat for just a few months.
Dennis Weir was a physics professor and was impressed with Einhorn's knowledge of the subject. But there was something about Einhorn's behavior that concerned him.
His manner was unsettling to me. Ira dominated a lot of people, and I suppose that's how he did it. In an intangible way, through eye contact. You can't describe these things, that particular kind of charisma, but I think I sensed some of his power.
Several weeks after Einhorn moved in, the Weirs announced they were taking a trip to the United States.
Ira became a little bit agitated about it, and even said explicitly that we were not to talk about him in the United States, that he might get extradited. And this really had the opposite effect to what was intended, because it made us very curious.
They came to visit some relatives in Chicago. They called the local newspapers here in Philadelphia, the Inquirer, and kind of got the story from them that the guy was wanted for murder.
It made us very upset, indeed, and very puzzled as to what to do.
There was little they could do, since Ireland did not have an extradition treaty with the United States.
So we had to improvise a solution one way or another, and what we did was we turned up at the house. I said, Ira, I'm giving you 20 minutes to leave this house, and I'm not prepared to discuss anything. I think you know why I'm doing this.
And Einhorn was again on the run. For 5 years, De Benedetto meticulously worked the case.
I never consciously sat back and said to myself, oh, I'm going to profile this guy. I mean, I was just using common sense, you know. But I had known a lot about the guy's mind and character. And I almost had developed like a sixth sense about the guy.
The next break came from a familiar but unexpected source.
It was in May of '86, as I recall. Mr. Weir calls me, you know, and he's all excited, and he says, you know, you're not going to believe this, but I just ran into Ira Einhorn.
He quite literally bumped into me.
Weir had transferred universities and was now at Trinity College. Einhorn had changed his name to Ben Moore and was visiting friends on the campus.
We tried to get through the same door at the same time from opposite sides, and that was a rather dramatic moment. And he tried to argue with me. He said, why don't you leave me alone? I said, why don't you leave me alone? This is my place of work, and you have come here.
By this time, an extradition treaty between the United States and Ireland was in effect. So armed with this treaty and the name Ben Moore, De Benedetto contacted the Irish police through Interpol. But by the time they show up, Einhorn is nowhere to be found.
That was very frustrating. But usually what happens with me is, you know, I get these setbacks, but in a couple days, you know, kind of things blow over and you get yourself together.
Einhorn had dropped out of sight, and the DA's office was getting restless.
Some guy walked up into my office with about 5 box loads full of stuff, and I had a detective assigned to me. We went through it, and pretty quickly we found we still had a case.
It was about 13 years since Ira had fled. And I was at my desk, and I got a phone call, and I believe it was Joel Rosen who said to me, we're going to try Ira in absentia. And I said, you're going to do what?
When somebody fails to appear for their trial, 2, 3, 4 years go by, and then we catch them, and then we bring them to trial, what happens is we lose those cases quite often because we can't find the witnesses, because the witnesses don't remember what happened. So for us, the ability to try defendants in absentia is very important.
In September 1993, Ira Einhorn went on trial for the murder of Holly Maddox.
I thought the whole thing was quite unfair, but the judge ordered an absentia trial over my objection.
Gelman did not focus on the CIA conspiracy defense. Instead, he challenged the validity of the forensic tests, but the evidence was overwhelmingly stacked against him. Evidence that the downstairs neighbor heard a woman scream around the time of the murder. Evidence that a brown gooey substance leaked into the downstairs apartment that prosecutors identified as body fluids. evidence that Einhorn tried to persuade two young women to help him get rid of a steamer trunk that he told them contained secret Russian documents.
But when they opened the trunk in the courtroom, it was a frightening moment. Even though everybody knew there was nothing in it, everybody was kind of like looking to see, almost with shortness of breath, of what was going to be in the trunk when they opened the trunk. It was frightening.
On September 29, 1993, after only 2 hours of deliberations, the jury returned a verdict. Ira Einhorn was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. But Einhorn was still out there, somewhere, always a step ahead of investigators.
I always felt that I would find him someday.
At one point, I said to him, I said, "You're not smart enough to catch Ira."
Coming up, Einhorn's 16-year flight comes to an end, but justice would not be swift. The district attorney's office is haunted by an earlier decision.
I think it's almost like a Greek tragedy. Those people who advocated the absentia trial turned out to have given him exactly what they did not want to give him, perhaps freedom.
In Philadelphia, Ira Einhorn was now a convicted murderer. But in Europe, the elusive hippie guru was still a free man.
He's getting older now. He's been on a run for a long time. And he's dependent on somebody to take care of him.
De Benedetto had received a tip in 1988 from Barbara Bronfman, the same woman who posted Einhorn's bond a decade earlier. She told him that Einhorn was living in Sweden with a woman named Annika Floden. When authorities arrived at her house in Stockholm, Einhorn was already gone. Soon after, Floden herself disappeared.
So the key thing here is, to us to find Annika. I'm running on the assumption that they might be back together.
Then, in 1997, Interpol tells De Benedetto that Annika Floden had applied for a French driver's license. Using the address from the application, French police, disguised as fishermen and tourists, staked out the house, a converted mill outside the town of Champagne-Mouton.
We get word from them that, hey, it looks like your guy.
Ira Einhorn was arrested on Friday the 13th of June. Buffy Hall was in a supermarket parking lot when her babysitter Tina gave her the message.
Tina says, "Oh, by the way, you got a really weird phone call today." I said, "Okay, who is it from?" "Some guy named Joel from Philadelphia. He said to tell you they caught him." I almost went to my knees in the parking lot.
I thought, hallelujah, this is over. We're going to have closure. Well, go ahead and give me the naive prize of the year.
At the extradition hearing in November 1997, the U.S. government ran into an unexpected obstacle that would frustrate them for years.
We caught wind that there was a problem, and that the French did not like our system of trials in absentia, and there was going to be a problem with the extradition.
And in France, unlike the United States, and unlike the law in Pennsylvania, if a person is tried in absentia, and they're later convicted, and subsequently apprehended, they are guaranteed a new trial on the mere asking.
While Pennsylvania law does provide room for a person to appeal their conviction, the time limit for Einhorn to do that had run out. Without the guarantee of a new trial, French law required that the extradition be denied. Ira Einhorn was a free man again.
I am very happy to be going home.
Yeah! I got a call at 4 in the morning from a reporter in France. He said, "Hi, I'd just like to know your reaction on the fact that Ira Einhorn was set free today." And I said, "Excuse me?"
I didn't get out of bed for 2 days. I was completely totaled. I could not believe that we'd been done that way twice.
But the Philadelphia DA was determined to get Einhorn back and went to the Pennsylvania legislature to try and get Einhorn a new trial.
He shouldn't be able to benefit from the fact that he deliberately avoided going to trial and then complain about it while he's safely ensconced on his wife's money in France.
The legislature passed a law entitling Einhorn to a new trial upon his return. With this provision, a second extradition hearing was granted a year later.
Now, on first blush, it would seem that this has cured the problem.
Simon, a defense attorney with an expertise in extradition law, argues that this new provision is unconstitutional and therefore unenforceable.
The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania goes on to say, the legislature cannot, by an act of assembly, overrule a judicial decision. It cannot grant a new trial. It cannot direct a new trial.
This law is a ruse in my mind. It's a snare. And Einhorn by no means is guaranteed a new trial.
So he really doesn't want to be tried. I mean, that's the bottom line. He wants to literally and figuratively get away with murder. That's what he wants. I'm not going to let him.
In February 1999, the request for extradition was granted, with the provision that Einhorn get a new trial upon his return. In December 2000, Einhorn appealed to the highest administrative body in France, the Council of State. If his appeal is denied, Einhorn has suggested that he will take his case to the European Court of Human Rights.
We will fight them wherever they go, because we must. We must do this for our principle and so that right has a chance to prevail.
Coming up, 24 years after the murder of Holly Maddox, the fight for justice continues. For 4 years, Ira Einhorn avoided extradition. But on July 12, 2001, Einhorn's last chance appeal in France was denied. As dozens of riot police surrounded his home, Einhorn tried one last tactic. He slit his throat with a dull knife in an unsuccessful attempt to commit suicide. Refusing medical attention, he asked to speak to reporters.
I have something to say very directly to Mr. Jospin. Il criait ça. He is responsible. He is the Prime Minister. He's responsible for all the people.
Einhorn was in the hospital. His lawyers requested that the European Court of Human Rights hear his case, and the extradition was once again stalled.
It may require 25 more years to bring him to justice, but if that's necessary, then we'll do it.
I have vowed to be at the airport when he's brought in leg irons and chains. I want to see that. I want to live long enough to see that.
1 week later, on July 19th, the European Court announced that since Einhorn was not eligible for the death penalty, they would not further delay his extradition. After 20 years, Ira Einhorn came back to Philadelphia.
One small step for justice, one giant leap for law enforcement and the rule of law. It's a measure of satisfaction that hard work has paid off.
I'm going to have a barbecue at my place for my friends who have listened to this and kept me together through all of this.
In 1988, the Maddox's ailing father committed suicide. 2 years later, their mother died from emphysema. Holly's brother and sisters took over the fight, and in 1999, they sued Einhorn to prevent him from financially benefiting from his life story. They also maintain a website in memory of Holly, where they help raise money for victims of domestic violence.
If we can help one person, we know that we've done something for Holly, so she didn't die for nothing.
Meanwhile, Einhorn's friends are still trying to come to terms with the fact that he could have committed such a brutal murder.
We came up with a frightening scenario. And the scenario was there were only 3 explanations, and they were all horrible. The first explanation was that Ira did it. He was totally out there and said, I didn't do it. So he was like the greatest actor you could imagine. The second theory, we said, was a conspiracy theory. And that was even more horrendous. That would mean that the CIA, the FBI, the KGB was singling Ira out. The third element was that Ira did it, but that he actually used his mind to turn off the fact that he did this. That it was a moment of losing control, and that he really wasn't Ira at that moment. It didn't happen. That's the classic psychotic breakdown. There's no other solution. There's no other explanation. What is there?
Almost a quarter of a century after the murder of Holly Maddox, Philadelphia's most famous hippie is now serving a life sentence at Houtsdale Prison in the remote Appalachian Mountains of Pennsylvania.